Hey guys, Caleb here from CDBS Studios, and I've been on YouTube for a little while now, and I have made a lot of ranking videos, ranging from all completely different topics in different franchises, genres, and a multitude of different things. But when I was looking through my list of ranking videos, I discovered that I have never once done a filmography ranking, that being a video where I take a look at the filmography of one specific director or actor. So I figured today is the day I finally changed that. We're going to talk about one of the most critically acclaimed directors of all time. That, of course, being Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan is definitely one of those directors that I feel like almost everybody and their mother knows about because he is definitely one of the most famous filmmakers who has made some honestly generationally phenomenal films. He is the man who has brought us so many fun twists on famous sci-fi concepts like Inception, Interstellar, and Tenet. He proved to the world that superheroes could be taken seriously through the Dark Knight trilogy. He sprinkled in some famous adaptations slash biopics through films like Oppenheimer and his most recent film, The Odyssey, while also sprinkling in a bunch of very interesting films. So today, in honor of The Odyssey just having came out, we are going to talk about and rank all 13 of Christopher Nolan's films, from the worst to the best. So without further ado, let's get this video started. Okay, so I know I just spent the entire intro glazing the fact that Christopher Nolan is a filmmaker that has some honestly phenomenal films, but to start this video off, I unfortunately have to talk about the one Christopher Nolan movie that I'm not really super big on. That, of course, being Dunkirk. Now, I want to call out straight away that I do not think Dunkirk is a bad movie at all. This is a competently made film that has nothing really to criticize when it comes to things such as the performances, the score, and the action and all of that usual stuff you expect from a big action blockbuster from like Christopher Nolan. But the thing that for me that always drags this film down and it makes it the one Christopher Nolan movie that I don't really like is because of the fact that the story. I have mentioned before on this channel that I am absolutely not a war film person. I just find the films all the same cliche, boring films, and I've never seen one that actually has managed to engross me and make me actually like a war movie. I've never seen one. And this, unfortunately, is just a war movie, plain and simple. There's no interesting nuances in the story. There is some funny ways, like Christopher Nolan still finds a way to take this material and turn it into his own by doing things where he plays with time by having kind of two different timelines playing out simultaneously in the same film, which can get a little confusing at times. There's definitely a lot of great moments throughout this movie, and like I said, I do not think Dunkirk is a bad movie. It just is the kind of movie that one watch is probably enough for me. Like, I'm probably never going to check this out again because it's the kind of movie where you watch it once, you get exactly the what you expected and nothing subverted your expectations. So, Dunkirk is the one Christopher Nolan movie that I'm not huge on, but I want to make sure you know that even though this is last place on this list, this is still a very competently made movie, and I will still say Christopher Nolan has never made a bad movie. Dunkirk is just the one Christopher Nolan movie that I would not want to rewatch ever again. So it has to go last, but at the same time, again, it's a competently made movie, so it's not as bad as some of the other films I've placed in last place in other ranking videos. I just hope that we can all agree on that kind of fact. All right, now it's time to talk about the most infamous Nolan film from most people's rankings. That, of course, being Tenet. Now, Tenet is the kind of movie that I can understand why people don't like it because it is definitely one of Christopher Nolan's cases where it almost feels like this movie is kind of the anti Christopher Nolan movie because the movie that this film gets constantly compared to is Inception, and it's really easy to see why. Both of them are are movies that take famous sci-fi concepts and twist them on their heads to try and tell fun action blockbuster hits. And Tenet is almost taking all of the things that are great about Inception and kind of doing them infinitely worse. The sci fi concept that this movie plays with is the fact that time moves backwards for certain objects and people. And that just isn't as interesting as a concept as I think Christopher Nolan thought it was, because they never really go out of their way to explain some of the rules of this universe. It just says, oh, suddenly this car is moving backwards or this bullet can go backwards. And it leads to the fact that I think the twists of this movie are way too obvious. Not saying that a movie needs a good twist to be good, but when the movie already has the concept of let's have things go in reverse, I instantly guessed so many of the twists, like the fact that the two masked people that Robert Pattinson and the protagonist are fighting were themselves from the future, and then I guessed that the woman that the main female character saw jumping off this boat was going to be her later in the film. Like, literally anything else would have been more subversive. So, that honestly made the film kind of boring, I'm going to be honest. The action is still cool, and there's still some funny comedy bits, and I will admit the villain, while being kind of boring and cliche, he does at least still get some good moments off, and he's definitely not the worst Christopher Nolan villain. But at the end of the day, this is definitely one of those movies where when I watch it, I just think to myself, why am I not just watching Inception? Like, I didn't think it really deserved last place because at least I was entertained the whole time, unlike Dunkirk. But at the same time, I feel like this is definitely the movie most people put at the bottom of their Christopher Nolan ranking, and it's really easy to see why. It's not a bad movie per se, like I said, I don't think Nolan's ever made a bad movie, but it definitely is a case where everything I love about Christopher Nolan is done for the worst in this movie, and I think it means it's the Christopher Nolan movie that I definitely don't want to rewatch, much like Dunkirk. But again, I feel like I had more fun with Tenet, so I didn't think it really deserved last place in this video. So I have a bit of a confession. Until like 2 months ago now, I had never seen the Dark Knight trilogy. I mean, can you blame me? DC basically burned me out back when Justice League and Zack Snyder was taking over the entire DC universe and making it so boring that I basically just hit switch teams, went over to Marvel, and kind of never came back to DC and the Batman franchise, which was really a shame because I grew up as a huge fan of Batman until I eventually switched teams and now Spider-Man is my GOAT. But up until recently, I had never seen the Dark Knight trilogy, mainly because I kind of didn't want to, and I had heard things about it for years. So 2 months ago, when I was preparing for this video, I sat down and said, okay, let's finally give these films a watch. And yeah, the worst of these movies, I can't really disagree with the public, is definitely The Dark Knight Rises. I mean, this movie is fine for the most part, and it does have a lot of positives. Of course, this movie being a Dark Knight film means that the action is still lively and amazing. Like, there is some honestly phenomenal action in this film, from the multiple chase sequences we get in here with the bat cycle and all that, which was fun, to even some of the more grounded fight sequences where we just have fights like with Bane versus Batman, which was pretty funny. I do really like Catwoman in this movie. Anne Hathaway plays this version of the character with such a fun motivation, and I really found the Catwoman character to probably be my favorite character in the film. The returning characters come back from the previous films, like Lucius Fox, Alfred, and all that, but they don't get a lot of time to shine, but they still are very fun. The action is, like I mentioned, the action is gripping. I love Christian Bale as Batman. He still is great in the role in this movie, and I like the journey he goes on, especially that ending he gets. But there is so many negatives that really drag this movie down. I learned through extensive research that apparently they were originally supposed to make 4 Dark Knight movies, and there was supposed to be a third movie that was supposed to center around Heath Ledger's Joker again, and then we would get this movie, The Dark Knight Rises, that was centered on Bane. But when Heath Ledger unfortunately passed away, Christopher Nolan was forced to rewrite the script and basically shoved some of his concepts from that third Dark Knight movie into this fourth movie to make it one big third movie. And you can definitely feel it in the pacing. This is nearly a 3-hour film, and so much of the early parts of this movie don't really matter and really could be cut for the sake of it. I will say one thing I've never understood about this movie and still am completely baffled on all these months later is specifically Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character. They basically promote this random ass police officer to the main lead for the middle hour of this film and completely shaft Batman and Gordon, which really didn't make sense to me at all because, like, why would you do that? And then they just have this lazy final sequence in the last 5 minutes to lazily justify him becoming lazily saying that he's a Robin as his first name and then that he's going to take over the Batman mantle, which I like that idea connecting this movie back to the Dark Knight. I'm sorry, the Batman Begins, but it's just such a boring character arc to go on, and I never understood why they felt the need to do this. Like, if it was me, I would have just named him after the Batman Beyond character or after Barbara Gordon. Like, you could have done either of those, and it would have made more sense and would have been more worth it. And I also got to talk about the villains. I mean, Bane is definitely an intimidating villain. I like him for what he is. Tom Hardy plays this kind of goofy version of the character, and while it definitely is not my favorite version of the character, he still is fun to watch on screen, and his fight sequences are great. But for some goddamn reason, this movie decides to introduce a twist villain into the film only with 10 minutes left in the runtime. So she gets to be around for like 4 minutes evil wise, and then she has one of the laziest death sequences I've ever seen. Also, Gotham itself looks so boring in this movie. Like, if you didn't know, they changed filming locations because they filmed the first two movies in Chicago and this movie in New York. And there are so many scenes where it's so painfully obvious that Gotham is New York City in this movie. And it really killed the tone for me because if you even know the Batman character, you know Gotham was based on Chicago and Metropolis was based on New York City. So it really just feels like Batman's in the wrong city for most of this movie. At the end of the day, this isn't the worst movie I've ever seen, and I really feel like personally I have to call it that I don't think the Dark Knight trilogy is the best superhero trilogy of all time, because this is definitely one of the cases where it really gets dragged down, and I feel like a movie trilogy needs three phenomenal films to really be called the best trilogy. But Dark Knight Rises is definitely good. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it has so many issues compared to the previous two entries in the trilogy that really drag it down and in Christopher Nolan's overall filmography. So, sorry to the Rises fans. I think this movie was fine. It definitely just has way too many issues for me to justify putting it any higher than it is right now. Following is Christopher Nolan's first movie that he ever made, and you can kind of feel it in the film itself. It's definitely a well made movie, like we've talked about, and I definitely don't think it's bad, but it's definitely a movie where you can definitely feel Christopher Nolan just doing what he can and proving that his concept work, because this movie was made on a shoestring budget with basically just whatever cameras Christopher Nolan had lying around. He only could use natural lighting because he couldn't afford any lighting equipment. And it definitely feels like a movie that I would make as a film student than an actual movie coming from one of the best directors of all time. The story itself is definitely interesting, as the entire concept is basically going through Christopher Nolan's classic box of tricks for the first time, doing the idea of using the score to enhance the scenes, using nonlinear time to have reveals hit harder. And it's kind of just a big con movie, which I really liked, as these two guys are trying to be con artists until you eventually get the final twist, which I thought was a really good twist that really brought the whole film together, in my opinion. And there's a lot about this movie that I absolutely adore, and it's really fun to see where Christopher Nolan technically got his start as a filmmaker, but it is definitely one of the movies that I would call one of his most basic in story and premise. So I really don't think it deserves to go very high on the list, but it definitely has less issues than some of the more problematic Christopher Nolan. So this is kind of where I feel like Following fits the best in the list, but it definitely is one of Christopher Nolan's most pedestrian movies, and I think it leads to the film not being very high in my favorite Christopher Nolan list. especially when how stacked the rest of his filmography gets as he went on. But this is definitely a great start for his career, but nothing really more special, to be honest. Next up is Insomnia, the actual last Christopher Nolan movie I watched for this video. And Insomnia is one of those movies I've never felt the need to check out until doing this video. And watching it now, it's definitely a very interesting film. It's a movie where Dunkachino plays a cop who gets sent up to Alaska to try and hunt down a killer who we later learn is the genie from Aladdin. So that was pretty interesting. And of course, we have the new Karate Kid here to play the female sidekick to Dunkachino. And basically, the movie also plays in the idea that we are in Alaska during a time when the sun never sets, which plays into the fact that both the genie and Dunkachino have insomnia, and so they're not sleeping and slowly going insane. And the movie has a very interesting concept about the idea of corrupt cops, which I thought was a fun route for the story to go. There are some fun twists and turns along the way. I like this inciting mystery, and seeing just Dunkachino and Genie going against each other is a really fun dynamic that I loved. The film is shot well. There's some good action in here once the action does finally get involved in the story. And overall, I had a lot of fun with Insomnia. But I think the thing that makes me put it so low on the list is due to the fact that this definitely feels not like a Christopher Nolan movie. Because a fun thing I realized when I was looking up facts about this movie is that this is currently the only film in Christopher Nolan's filmography where he did not write the script for it, as he's tackling somebody else's script. And you can definitely feel that in the movie itself because, well, the story is told completely linearly. There's female characters in here that actually have agency to the plot. And overall, it just doesn't feel like a Christopher Nolan movie, to the point where I would call this his most pedestrian film to date, because really anybody could have directed this movie. So it always feels off as a part of the Christopher Nolan filmography. So I definitely feel like I have to put it low for the fact that it doesn't feel like a Nolan film, but it's still a good movie, to the point where I think it deserves to rank above the problematic Nolan films, but it doesn't deserve to go above the phenomenal films that actually feel like Christopher Nolan directed them. So Insomnia is still a fun movie. I would recommend you check it out, but at the end of the day, this is not my favorite Christopher Nolan movie because, well, like I said, I feel like you could slap any director's name on this movie, and like if you like just re-edited this film to put a completely different director's name on it and then gave me a copy of the film, I probably wouldn't even know that Christopher Nolan was the real director of this. Like, that's how much not like a Nolan movie this feels. But it's still a fun movie. I had a good time with it. I just don't feel like it deserves to go any higher. Oh boy, Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, Oppenheimer, Oppenheimer. What are we gonna do with you? The film that is the entire reason for Christopher Nolan now having a Best Picture winner and also being an Academy Award winning director. And it's all right. Oppenheimer to me is definitely one of those movies that is very mixed on how I feel about it, as the entire middle chunk of this movie, the middle hour where we are actually at the Trinity test, and we see Killian Murphy actually building the atomic bomb, and we have all the different scenes where we talk about the building of it, showing us how we're going through all the processes of it, the and actually getting to the Trinity test sequence in the movie is easily the best part of this whole thing. It is such a great sequence in this film, and you really get to love as you see Oppenheimer slowly lose himself to building this bomb, and then afterwards realizing the sins he's committed on the world by doing it. It is so good, and especially that Trinity test scene. Whew, that scene was so great to see on the big screen. But then you have the rest of the films surrounding it. And I'm not gonna lie, I really am not a huge fan of the rest of the movie around this middle hour. Because the first half, where we're seeing Killian Murphy come up with the idea and to build the bomb, and he basically is just coming up with all the plans, and we see him finding the place to build the test site, is all kind of fun, but it definitely goes on a little too long, especially when we kind of know everything and they're just stalling at that point, which it's also interesting. I do really like the sets. I forgot to mention that when he builds the Trinity site, especially because, well, I actually live close to where they actually did build the site. So that's actually pretty cool for me, especially when I watched this movie the first time. I literally recognized the location, which was kind of sad to be honest. But then you also get the third hour of this movie, which is when we are at the hearing where the United States government is basically grilling Oppenheimer about whether or not he's a Nazi. And genuinely, there's only so many ways and so many times that they can ask, are you a Nazi, Oppenheimer?" before you really get the point and you really get bored. So that was not that great, and I kind of just wanted the film to be over like 30 minutes before it actually was, which is not a great sign because I feel like if you did do some work to cut down the beginning and the ending of this movie, we genuinely would have something great in here. And I can understand why people love this film so much. It just is clearly not for me, but it does have a lot of things I love about it. Also, it has Robert Downey Jr., my beloved, and he's great in this movie. I don't understand why there's some people who absolutely hate on him. He is great in this film, and he is absolutely a solid actor. So, yeah, Oppenheimer's a fun movie. It definitely has a lot to enjoy, but of the biopics I've ever seen, it definitely is one of those cases where they played it a little too straightforward when I think I wish they went a little more outlandish and out there with certain aspects of the film to make it more enjoyable. It's fine for the most part, but definitely not my magnum opus of Christopher Nolan like it is for so many other people. Batman Begins is definitely one of the weirdest entries in the Christopher Nolan filmography. The first film in the Dark Knight trilogy, which I feel like this movie is very overshadowed because of like just how peak The Dark Knight is and kind of how mediocre The Dark Knight Rises is. The Batman Begins kind of sits in the middle slot where a lot of people just don't know what to do with the film. For me personally, I think it's actually one of the better origin story superhero films I've ever seen. As I really do think that while I'm against some of the plague that the Dark Knight trilogy inflicted on superhero films in the long run, where so many superhero films felt they needed to take place in grounded worlds, this movie makes that grounded world work really well. As we spend the entire first hour of this film just going through Batman's origin, and honestly, every piece of it that you could want explained is explained in an actually reasonable way. And it makes for a very satisfying moment where we do finally see Batman in his suit an hour into this film. It really, really works. The villains are also very nice. While I'm not huge on Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow because personally I think he got too little to do in this movie, but I absolutely love Ra's al Ghul. He is so fun of a villain, and I love the twist associated with him. It makes for such an interesting character and villain, and it makes for such an awesome character. I also love Jim Gordon in this movie. I was not expecting him to be such a major character when I went into this for the first time because I've never seen Jim Gordon be a prominent Batman character, but this movie makes him one, and it really works. I also just love the stylized look of Gotham in this movie. Apart from the other two movies that definitely went a little too big city-ish, I like that this movie went for a more small scale city, and it makes for such a fun stylized look, especially in the final battle. That is such a solid sequence. Overall, Batman Begins is a very solid movie that has a lot of things to love. I just think that once again, it definitely is one of the more simple Christopher Nolan movies, and it leads to the film not being as high on my list as it is for many other people. But at the end of the day, I loved Batman Begins. It had a lot of things to enjoy. It just is the kind of film where, especially due to the fact of the story itself, you kind of watch it once, maybe every 3 years, and then you never really rewatch it outside of that. So Batman Begins is great. I had a lot of fun with it, but at the end of the day, I definitely don't think it's one of my favorite Christopher Nolan movies, but I could not deny that I had a blast with this movie, and it also set the foundation for one of the best Christopher Nolan movies, but we're going to save our discussion on that movie for later in the list. I knew nothing about Memento when I went into the film, and honestly, that is the preferred way to watch this thing because it is so good. I mean, It's such an interesting concept for a movie. What if we told a classic mystery story, but we did it in reverse? And I've never seen a movie be able to pull something like that off, and they make it work so well as we start the movie at the end where we would traditionally finish our story. And instead, the film goes backwards from there as we have our main character having this condition where he can't form any new memories. So he constantly keeps forgetting stuff. So he gives messages to himself through these photographs he has and these tattoos he has, all on a mission to try and find the guy that killed his wife. And there are so many layers to this mystery that keep getting added on as we go farther back in time, so it is great throughout the whole film. And even the final payoff to the mystery was so great. And it genuinely is one of the weirdest ways I've seen to tell a mystery story. But my God, did it work. However, I think the thing that holds this movie back from being any higher than it is right now for me is due to the nature of the backwards of this movie where we're going backwards. I found the movie at sometimes was very hard to keep track of as there were so many clues you could forget about or things that made little to no sense, and it made the movie a little confusing on this first watch for me, but that problem might be solved when I eventually do a rewatch of this film. But Memento was definitely a very fun time. I like the concept, but I think the execution maybe needed a little more effort. And I definitely think that we could have spent a little more time in the editing room here, Nolan. But other than that, Memento is a solid film. And genuinely, if you've never seen this movie, go in as completely blind as possible because, man, it made the experience so much better. Oh boy, this is your GOAT, right? This is the movie everyone claims is the best Christopher Nolan movie that you have to see to believe? It's alright. Yeah, I've never been huge on Interstellar, and even though I've just recently watched it for the first time, I last year, I definitely found it very kind of average. I will admit, this is a phenomenal film in its outright, as this is the kind of movie you have to see to believe. I'll happily openly admit that this has probably some of the best visuals in Christopher Nolan's entire filmography, from so many of the ways they depict the planets in the space to the black hole, to even just the fact about floating in space, even the Tesseract at the very end, it all comes together to make such a visually stunning film. And I like that for the first time in a Nolan movie, the emotional heart is at the very forefront of the story as we see a man who is torn apart from his children, and he needs to get back to them spread across the time and space. That scene where he watches 23 years worth of video diaries from his children and he just cries is such an emotionally hard-hitting scene that I absolutely adored. I love the whole idea behind this movie that the daughter was the answer to everything. There is so much to love across this film throughout its entire runtime, but it unfortunately has some issues. I will admit that there are some issues that could be solvable. Like, I think the son has little to no use in the story. Like, I feel like you could have cut him out with no interest, so I don't know why he's here. I kind of found Matt Damon's character to be a little bit of a boring antagonist. Like, when you introduce a character that is supposed to be a foreshadowing and also a representation of all the negative things mankind can do. Naming him Dr. Man felt a little bit too on the nose, and also the his plans and the way he executes some of his things is really kind of boring and really stupid. So not a huge fan of that, to be honest. And the film does force you to take some leaps in logic to understand some of the stuff and just kind of accept certain things exist in the universe to in order to justify the plot. And also I really don't understand why they kind of forced Matthew McConaughey into a relationship with Anne Hathaway. Like, The movie at the end tries to justify they have a romantic relationship, but I never felt like they did, so it was really weird to me. Please, can someone explain this to me? Because I generally don't understand what the goal or point of that was. But other than that, Interstellar is still a solid film, and I generally will not lie with anybody who says that it's their favorite Christopher Nolan. But for me, I just found it a little too average to the point where I couldn't justify putting it any higher. It's still a solid movie that I would genuinely say you need to watch to believe. But like I mentioned earlier this year, like I think Project Hail Mary is just this but better. So yeah, sorry, Interstellar fans. Holy, The Prestige is this good and none of you ever told me? The Prestige is genuinely one of my new favorite Christopher Nolan movies, and man, this movie was phenomenal. And I don't even know if that's a controversial take or something, because I've never seen anybody this high on The Prestige before, and I absolutely adored this film from beginning to end. I mean, this movie is very simple in its story, as basically you have two magicians played by our resident Batman and Wolverine who are in a rivalry with each other and constantly trying to one up each other's tricks to become the next greatest magician on the block. And it's actually really interesting to watch this movie as you see the two of them slowly lose themselves in their obsession to take the other down. And it really leads to some very phenomenal moments. And there are some amazing scenes throughout this where they screw each other over in their own tricks, but also talk to each other about trying to find ways to get around it. And that final trick at the end is so good. I don't want to spoil anything. Let me just say that final line that serves the tagline for this movie, "Are you watching closely?" Let me just say I was not watching closely enough, and that twist got me in the end. This movie also features David Bowie as Nikola Tesla, which genuinely is phenomenal casting. And there's some great final reveals in the tricks. Michael Caine's character is great as he explains the as he kind of is a mentor figure to the world of magic, and it makes for such a fun character. The daughter, even though she's in this very little, she had such a phenomenal role in the film as well. If I had any critiques that did drive this movie down for being perfect, I would say that the female characters are very underwritten in this. Like Scarlett Johansson shows up in this film as the assistant to Wolverine, and she really doesn't and she really is very underwritten in the story, and a lot of the things she does in this movie are get told to us at the end by Christian Bale, which I guess I kind of wanted to see more of her character on screen. Also, Christian Bale has a wife in this movie who barely factors into the plot. Like, she's very underwritten in the story, and you kind of can understand a little bit of what they're going for, but it really isn't anything special. While I absolutely loved The Prestige, and it definitely is one of the new most underrated Christopher Nolan movies, I still have to admit it has its flaws, so I don't really think it goes any higher. But don't be wrong. Don't catch me saying The Prestige is still a solid film, and overall, it easily is one of Christopher Nolan's best films. But it never was gonna be higher because, well, the films coming up are just that much more peak. The Odyssey is Christopher Nolan's most recent film that I already spent an entire other video praising. So I don't really want to spend too long here going into my thoughts on the film because I just did that like a week ago. So I'm just going to reiterate my biggest points here. This movie is honestly phenomenal. It's some of Nolan's best work to date. All of the performances are phenomenal. The action is stellar. There are so many scenes in this that are jaw dropping. And honestly, there is so much in here that I absolutely adore, from the obvious things that we know Christopher Nolan for by this time, like the displacement of time, the way he uses music. All of that comes together to make a jaw-dropping experience that is generally some of his best work to date. But I still have the unfortunate flaws going in that I do think this movie's pacing is really off because the beginning of this movie is really, really slow and I was getting a little bored. The middle got really repetitive as it was a lot of stuff we either already knew or could have been implied, so I was kind of ready for the film to move on. And I figured the ending was starting to go on a little bit, and I was ready for this movie to start wrapping up about 40 minutes before it actually did. So anyway, The Odyssey is still a solid movie, and if you want to hear my more extended thoughts on the film, go check out my other video on it. But we still got two Christopher Nolan movies to get to that are even better. And I have a feeling most of you going to this video knew that these two were gonna be the top two. Guys, I can't believe I'm saying this, but The Dark Knight is genuinely one of the best superhero movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Not kidding, actually. As much as I glaze the MCU on this channel and talk about how Marvel is always going to be my GOAT, and it is, but I cannot lie when I say that that watching The Dark Knight was genuinely like watching the Mona Lisa of superhero movies. Like, I don't even know how you manage that. I'm not even a huge DC fan anymore, but woo! This movie was amazing. This is the kind of movie where genuinely you have to see it to believe it. I know a lot of people claim that they can see a movie through all the memes and clips people post on the internet and say they've seen it, but no, man. If you think you've seen The Dark Knight because of memes and posts on the internet, you have not seen The Dark Knight. Genuinely, so many of the scenes in this movie come alive when you see them in the context of the film. And it makes for such a gripping, phenomenal story that never lets up for the entire runtime. Of course, I gotta talk about the absolute GOAT of this film, Heath Ledger as the Joker. He is playing this character perfectly. He is the best part of this movie, and I don't even think that's a hot take. He embodies the screen every time he's on, and he's perfect at playing a villain who's not really a villain, who just wants to see chaos unfold in Gotham City. And it plays perfectly off of Harvey Dent as Two-Face. Whew, he is a great secondary villain for what the story demands, and they both come together so perfectly. This movie's writing is some of the best I've ever seen in a superhero movie, to the point where there's basically a famous, iconic line you've heard a million times every like 5 or so minutes. That's how great the writing is. The action is absolutely gripping. Christian Bale gives his best performance as Batman in this movie. We get some great moments throughout, and genuinely, I have literally nothing to critique about this film. It is the kind of movie that you could watch a million times and still absolutely adore. And I cannot wait to eventually rewatch this movie when I get a chance because, whoo, I might even be better the second time around. And my, if you have never seen The Dark Knight, I highly encourage it. Obviously, start with Batman Begins and you can watch this movie, but also you don't really need The Dark Knight Rises to close up the story. So if you kind of just want to skip The Dark Knight Rises, then maybe go ahead. But man, this movie is amazing, and genuinely, it's one of the best superhero movies I've ever seen. And that's coming from the guy who absolutely glazes the MCU. But coming in first place for me with absolutely no judgment in my mind has to go to Inception. This movie to me is everything I've ever wanted in a movie and then some. The entire premise of this film alone is so fun, as it's a heist movie, which I absolutely adore heist movies. But this movie is a heist movie on steroids, as the entire premise is that the main characters can go into your mind and use your dreams to steal things from you. But this movie features them using that technology to try to plant an idea in Oppenheimer's brain. And it's such a phenomenal film throughout. I love that we spend like almost an hour getting to the heist as we build up these characters and the team itself, and we get some honestly phenomenal visuals like a city folding in fucking half. That is genuinely a phenomenal moment. We get some, and even when the heist finally gets started, we get some excellent moments throughout the entire film, like this fight sequence where a hallway is literally rotating around a person. That is such a phenomenal moment. I mean, genuinely, Inception is the kind of movie that you could watch a million times and still be asking questions about it, because that's how great this film is written. I genuinely have nothing negative to say about Inception because genuinely it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and it is a movie that you have to see to absolutely believe. Watch Inception if you haven't already. It is the peak of Christopher Nolan's filmography, and it is easily the film I could watch a million times without getting bored. So there you guys have it. My ranking for all 13 Christopher Nolan films. If you guys want to take your chance at ranking this guy's filmography, then leave your rankings down in the comments. And if that's a little too difficult, maybe just tell me what your top three are and maybe what your bottom three are. but this was an absolute phenomenal video to make. Christopher Nolan genuinely has one of the best filmographies in modern film, and it's easy to see why. His movies are so easy to love as they take some honestly phenomenal, easy concepts and twist them into such phenomenal movies. Like I mentioned, there were some movies early on in this video that I'm not huge on, but at the same time, he has never made a bad movie. And I can't wait to see what this guy does next in his career. So thank you guys all very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you guys all in the next one. Bye guys.